On your, so if you were looking for her, she's not going to be here.
Well, that's it, I'm leaving.
Okay, let's back up.
I would understand that. Okay, so because we have such a small group, because it's so late, I'm going to tend to do this much more informally. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with each of us, just letting each of us give you a little bit of our background and why we're here with historical fiction. And then we got a couple questions and hopefully we can have time for you to engage some. So I'll start to make it easier for everybody so they can kind of get themselves ready. My name is Randy Overbeck. I sometimes go as Dr. Randy Overbeck. I'm a retired educator who served children for nearly 40 years as a teacher, a college professor, and a school leader. I actually ran school districts for 28 years. That's another story. I mine this experience to create thrillers and mysteries which have achieved #1 and #2 best-selling status on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And my 6 published novels that I have all together have earned 13 national awards, including the Gold Award from Literary Titan, Thriller of the Year for Reader's Favorite, Mystery of the Year for Reader's View, the Best Book Award from Chandler Clare, and a finalist, only a finalist, for Silver Falchion. But I think what landed me on this panel primarily is that I have a new historical suspense about the American Revolution entitled Abigail Trent's Patriot Spy. In July, I signed with an agent from Stone Song Agency, and last night I got an email informing me that my agent has submitted my novel to her contacts, who are acquisition editors at 9 major publishers or imprints. Good things happen at Killer Nashville. Fingers crossed. All right. Next.
All right. I'm Shelley Blanton Stroud. I'm from Sacramento, California. Don't have a pile of my books with me. I have one that's just now out Tuesday. So I'm kind of exhausted and crazy, so excuse me if I don't make any sense. And then before that one, which I'll talk a little bit about, I had a trilogy called the Jane Benjamin Trilogy. You had asked us to, while introducing yourself, to say, how did we get to writing historical fiction? I retired after 34 years of teaching writing at Sacramento State University, and I also I lead writing workshops for people who work at the independent system operators who control the electrical grid, and nobody can understand what they say. So it's my job to teach them how to be understood. But and all of that kind of gets in there too. But what really brought me to writing historical fiction has to do with a lifelong obsession based on who my family was. On both sides of my family, I come from Dust Bowl Okies who arrived in California to escape the calamities that were both environmental and economic. And I grew up in the Central Valley of California, just surrounded by relatives who were Okies. That's what we called ourselves. So even though it was an insult, we embraced it. So, yeah, I'm all about it. So I had spent a whole life like taking in my family's stories and feeling like they mattered, but feeling like very few people also thought they mattered. And became then obsessed by the photographer Dorothea Lange, who did the WPA photographs of people who lived along the roads and worked the fields. And that had been my family. My dad is one of 10 kids, lived in a tent between an irrigation ditch and the highway. 10 kids get up before school and after school to pick cotton. So that was my family story, and in her photographs I saw someone lending dignity to people who don't often get that kind of dignity. And that's what got me started with my very first novel, which is set in 1937 and begins with what I like to call a cotton picking, cross-dressing gossip columnist in San Francisco, if that makes sense to you. So that's what got me started. It was the personal part of it. And then once I was in that world, I couldn't leave it. It was like 1937, turned to the next book, which was 1939, and then there was 42, and my most recent book, An Unlikely Prospect, is set in 1945 on VJ Day in San Francisco. So that's how I got into it.
Okay. Paul.
Hello, I'm Paul and I'm a writer. Now you know how to respond to that.
Hello, Paul.
Oh, there you go. Hello, Paul.
I was gonna say we're sorry for you.
Well, it works both ways. My interest in history started as a child. I grew up in the South in Georgia. My grandmother lived with us until she passed away at age 83. Her father was a Confederate soldier in the Civil War. So when she talked about history, she talked about the war, when Pa was in the war. And I grew up listening to her stories and then the stories that I grew up with in the South. My dad rode the rails as a hobo during the Depression. He's a World War II veteran, part of America's greatest generation. So I was immersed in history from the day I was born. I am a retired U.S. Army officer. I did 26 years in the infantry. I did 2 combat tours during Vietnam. So I have written a lot of history. I have 2 novel series, one about a private investigator who works out of a pool room in Atlanta, Georgia in the early 1950s. So I have that aspect of the early 50s in Atlanta in the South. I have another series, more contemporary, about another PI that has kind of transitioned from mystery into political intrigue based on some of the things and some of the places that I did in the military. And I have a couple standalone. My latest series, just happen to have 2 books here. I have a 3-book series about Vietnam. The 3rd one, I'm about halfway through with it now, but it's called War Stories and Fairy Tales, and it's based on things that I saw and did and other people did and saw and talked about and lied about what they did in Vietnam. And it's about a war correspondent. So I'm a little bit offended when they say it's history. Well, it's not history. I mean, to me, history is, ancient history. Well, I'm not that ancient, sort of.
Thank you, Paul.
But I guess now, I don't know what constitutes history.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
Allie?
Hi everyone, I'm Mally Becker, and I did not intend to be a writer. I volunteered at the National Historical Park near my home in New Jersey, in Morristown, where Washington spent 2 winters, because I thought I would be clearing trails and it would be great exercise since I was a lawyer and sat all day, as opposed to being a writer and sitting all day. But I was disappointed because instead of being assigned to clear trails, I was assigned to the archives, and I thought it would be really bad form to quit before I started. And that's where I found letters from our founding fathers from before they knew they were going to be famous. And John Jay, one of our first Supreme Court justices, was a huge complainer all the time, complained about everything. And another lesser known founder was trash talking Aaron Burr about how come you're up in Connecticut where nothing's happened when the action's down here in New Jersey. And slowly these people stepped out of those really depressing 2-dimensional pictures we all see that turn a lot of people off of reading more about the American Revolution. And then I found in the archives an indictment dated 1780, the middle of the war, of a local farmer for the crime of going to New York City in the middle of the revolution. And this offended me since I had lived in New York for a while. And I took it to the local historian there, and he said, "Oh honey, let me explain the real war. Historians think less than half the population south of New England supported independence. And so many of us New Jerseyans were spying for the British and taking secrets into Manhattan that the local government made it a crime to go there." And from there I started playing the writer's game of what if without knowing that's what I was doing. What if I was a woman who lived then, whose husband was one of those spies? And that turned into the first book, The Turncoat's Widow, about my heroine, George Washington's least likely spy. And that in turn turned into a 3-book series. And I'm just hooked on the American Revolution since we were as divided then as we are now.
Okay. Amber?
My name is Amber Meyer. I'm a developmental editor, so I have worked with clients on historical manuscripts from different time periods and helped them navigate those waters, and also because all editors want to be writers. I've also dabbled with some historical novels myself.
Okay, that's great. All right, let's talk a little bit about challenges. So, several of the people on this panel have written other things besides historical fiction, and there are certain challenges in historical fiction that you don't have writing suspense, writing mystery, writing thrillers. So, Mally, why don't you start us off? Let's talk about one challenge you found writing about the Revolutionary War.
The biggest challenge is really that I have a female amateur sleuth in the 18th century. And most women, then social norms would have that woman be sitting in her house, not speaking in public, never being alone with a man who was not her husband or a family member. And I'm sorry, I can't have a sleuth not able to talk to half the population or most of her suspects. So I made her a widow because only widows at the time could make their own decisions without asking permission of the menfolk. And I had her raised in a very, very rural area, so she really wasn't that aware of social norms at the time. And that's mostly how I handled those issues. And when she did need to talk to George Washington alone, I gave her a stomachache before she went into the room because she couldn't say no to George.
Okay.
I would say I have a book set during the 1930s, and sometimes I have to do a lot of Google searches or ChatGPT researching what technology they actually had available at the time, and so I know what I can use and what I can't. Just things like that.
Okay.
Well, my newest book, An Unlikely Prospect, is set during VJ Day. And on that day, when World War II kind of ended, when Japan surrendered, there were celebrations everywhere. And on the streets of San Francisco, it was the only celebration in the United States that turned from a celebration into a riot. And 1,000 people were hospitalized, 13 people were killed, 6 women were raped, at least 6 women were raped. And yet you can scarcely find any mention of it because the story was tamped down. San Francisco was trying to get the headquarters for the UN, so they did not want that story going out. So that was the premise. Here was the challenge, the major challenge I had. I did all this research. The DA at the time was Pat Brown, who became our governor in California, and he convened a grand jury immediately, resolved it in 2 weeks, declaring nobody did anything wrong, and commending all the political figures, the military figures, everybody was to be commended. So when I started doing my research, I was able to find grand jury reports for 1938, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 46, 47, 48. The box with that year's grand jury reports was missing. And I had help from all over California trying to find that. And I was just so disappointed at that challenge until I realized that challenge was actually an opportunity. It was an invitation to invent. And so I'm very clear in my author's note, where there is not fact, that's when I go in and fictionalize and I identify what I have invented. But it was a way to write this novel. So yeah, it was a challenge and it was disappointing, but it was a gift.
Okay, well,
I think for me, and mine don't go back that far. I've got 2 World War II novels, and then my Vietnam stuff. But for me, a lot of the challenge is correct dialogue, the terminology, slang that people used in World War II, slang that people used even in the 50s that we don't use now. Terminology, slang, customs, in dialogue using some dialects that we don't use now. And just trying to make sure that I'm true to the time where it's written. And products, I had a scene where I needed, a guy was talking about eating a hot dog, and he says he's gonna take a 6-pack of Drano to get rid of the indigestion after I ate this hot dog. Was Drano around in 1953? Yes, absolutely it was. I had to look it up, but it was a term I wanted to use, but I needed to know if Drano was around in 1950, and it was. So those are the things that I try to do to make sure that if I use something, it's correct.
Paul, that's a perfect segue. Before I go to our next question, I'll briefly answer the question myself. So my book, Abigail Trent, is about the Culper Ring, Revolutionary War. If you're not a Revolutionary War scholar, you might not know of the Culper Ring. The Culper Ring was the secret spy ring that George Washington organized that included 6 men and 1 woman. The problem is that there's very little actually written about the Culper Ring. And in fact, it was so secret that the 6th man, the identity of the 6th man wasn't revealed until 2020 by matching handwriting from the letter to some other notes that they had. And the woman has never been identified. So I've created a fictional character to step into that role, and making sure that, even though it's fiction, and I make that very clear, this is not historical scholarly work, I still try to make sure that the details are as accurate as possible. Okay, now, segueing to the second one is about dialogue. So one of the things you deal with in historical is exactly what Paul was alluding to, that regardless of what period we're talking about, whether it's 1930s in the U.S., Natalie, who's not here, does 1930s London. 2 of us are doing American Revolution. The language they used then is not the language we use now. So the question I want the panel to ask is, how did you decide which parts of that period language did you use? And then when did you decide that it's okay, I'm not using how they talk then, I'm going to use how we talk now, which is an eternal problem when you're doing historical fiction. So since you got to go early, you go first.
I think I went to a dialogue session this morning, and there was an author with a fabulous, deep Texas accent, and I apologize, there were many Texas accents, I know. And I think the same applies to historical dialect as regional, that you use it sparingly, you use it when you introduce your character. Maybe you use a few words to give color, but the goal with all dialogue is to have it flow and not take your reader out of the story. And if historical language is going to slow the reader down, what does that word mean? Then it should go. I have a friend, Liz Milleron, who writes World War II period, and she just says matter-of-factly, well, I picked 5 slang words from the time, I use those, and that's that. And I think you might use some for one character and no other characters so that each one gets their own identity. But that's how I handle it. So a few V's, more formal introductions, fewer contractions, and that's about it.
Well, yeah, it was actually a real problem for me when I wrote my first book, because it was so inspired by family stories that I just found myself mimicking my grannies and my grandpas and my aunts and my uncles. And man, I got it right. And I gave it to my editor, and she's like, oh my God, you gotta comb through and get rid of that. It is so thickly accented, so much dialect, so many colloquialisms, from Oklahoma and Texas in that exact time period. I know I was accurate, but it wasn't serving the story. So it's really what you're saying, Melanie. Mm-hmm. So I wound up combing through, getting rid of a lot of it, and I tried to, something we talked about before, tried to leave vivid examples of that in emotional scenes, when most of us might revert to our native way of speaking when someone cuts us off in traffic or when someone breaks up with us or something like that. So I let that be at vivid moments. And then the other thing I had problem with dialect-wise is that, I've got this Okie young girl who's only lived in labor camps, arriving in San Francisco, which was a very diverse place even then. And I was trying to figure out what would she think and say in this cafe, this diner, full of people that she's never met before. And I even struggled with, my granny used the word colored to refer to Black people.
Sure.
And so I struggled for a while. Should I, do I let this Okie girl in 1937 use that term? And I wound leaving it there. And then one other thing was in my most recent book, there's a rape, which I do not describe because I'm not capable of being that writer. But originally in that draft, the final word in that very short chapter, the rapist to the victim, is the C word. And that word, and there's no swearing in my novels, but that word is at the bottom of that chapter. That's what he says to her. And so I got through all the writing of it, like that's the rape for me. I'm not describing the rape scene, that is the rape. And before I sent it to my editor, I cut it out. I just couldn't, it was too triggering for me, though I felt it was the authentic thing that would have, authentic and accurate, and emotionally authentic too. But I had to cut it because I just couldn't live with it.
It wasn't you.
It wasn't me.
I know you're only partway in your journey, but can you answer this one?
I have ran into issues with my character is a native Englishman, so their English is a little bit different than our English. So one thing I've actually started doing is I will go scene by scene and I'll upload it to a program called Claude AI, and I will ask it for moments in there where I sound too American, or ask it how I can change
What's it
phrases.
called now, tell again?
It's called Claude AI.
With it.
Spell that.
CLAUD, and if you go to like Claude.ai, it'll bring it up. But it's really great for help with the dialect and nailing that. And then you can also use either Claude or ChatGPT and upload samples and tell it to make you a character Bible, and actually ask it to help you with like what you talked about, picking those certain words for your certain characters from that time period that you use so that you can keep a record for yourself. Because I don't know about you, but I'll forget characters' names as I'm going through, like, what was that guy's name? So it's nice to be able to just have it create one for you, and then you can print it out and keep it with you to refer to.
I've got 3 advice for you for, one's a lesson I learned in characters. The first one is, if you're really seriously interested in creating moving historical fiction, if you haven't, you need to read Pillars of the Earth. If you haven't read it, it is the best, biggest selling historical novel ever written. It's it's the story of the building of a medieval cathedral, which sounds boring.
Oh, it's
It is
incredible.
anything but.
It's incredible.
But you get, so, the writer, Ken Follett, is writing about, I think it's 1200,
It starts at 900.
900, okay.
900.
So, well, then some of it's prequel, but he starts at a time when we have no idea what their language was. There's no way of recording what they talked like then. So he does a wonderful job of navigating so that you think you are in that time, even though 95% of everything he says, 95% of everything he writes is how we kind of talk now. So it's a really good premise on, well, how much do you delve into the dialect or the language? So that's the first advice. The second advice I have for you is, this is only for those of you writing in this period, in the Revolutionary War period. There's a wonderful book called, I meant to write it down before I came, New Life for Old Words, I think is what it's called. If you take my card and ask me, I'll email you the name of it when I get home, because I should have written that down. And it has all of these words that were used in the 17th and 18th century to describe women, to describe men, to describe love, to describe. So I chose very, very carefully from that list words that would have been used at the time, but was careful to make sure that the reader would be able to tell by context what they were saying. So they had a different way of describing hanging. There's a couple of hangings in the book because that was pretty common in the American Revolution at the time. And so I used their language, but the reader clearly understands what it is. I thought I had done a pretty good job of doing that balance. And when I sent it to my agent, who happens to be an expert in Revolutionary War America, that's another great advantage I have. She sent it back, and one of the mistakes she found was I used the word okay.
Oh.
and I had used it multiple times, and she said, and I looked it up, okay, in case you're a historical nut, it was started in 1820, that was when the word was invented, it was in 1820, it had to do with the presidential election at that particular time. So she found that and got that, so you need somebody who has that kind of level of expertise to go, oh, and then she also faulted, so I used the word great, they used great in those days, but not the way we use it. They would never have said, oh, that was a great meal. That's just not how they use that word. So those kind of things are helpful. Okay, all right. Oh, you want to add
Yeah,
something?
let me add something.
Okay.
Yeah. To kind of follow on what Sally said, with my background, 26 years in the Army, I have no problem using any kind of language I want to. And most of my characters, particularly in my Vietnam books, do the same thing. But I ran into something similar to what you did. In the first book in my Johnny Morocco, the series set in Atlanta, he works in a pool room. And he goes in one morning to go in the pool room. He finds a dead body on a pool table. Well, the only person in the pool room besides him is this young African-American man who is a combination rat boy and janitor. And so he knows that this kid could not have killed this guy. So we have, the situation is, you have a white guy defending a black guy for killing a white guy in Atlanta in 1953, which is a kind of strange situation to begin with. But in the story, he's talking about somebody, and he used the term, this colored man, just like you're talking. And my editor came back and said, no, change it to a man of color. I said, that would have never flown in Atlanta in 1953. It just wasn't, it's correct today, but not correct for what I'm writing. So I changed it back and got away with it. But so you've got to be true to your characters and the time settings, you know? If it hurts, it hurts. But if it's true, it's true.
Well, I think
I'm
that.
gonna, can I add one last thing? And then I'm gone and I apologize, but whatever time period you're writing it, especially if it's 20th century, if you can go into Goodreads or just Google bestsellers of fill in the year and read 2 or 3 books to get a sense of the cadence of the language and the dialogue. And some of it for 18th century is god-awful boring. We just don't write like that anymore. But it still give you something that you can use. And thank you, and I apologize for.
You gotta get a plan. You gotta get a plan.
Can I add 2 words?
Yeah.
But Hamilton, let's remember, a lot of people are interested in historical topics spun to modern and contemporary interests and style. So that's a thing as well.
And Paul, I want to kind of add, so I had a similar one. So this particular book is a historical, it takes place 25 years ago. The answer to your question is, anything 25 years older is considered historical, but that's not really right. There is a part of the book that actually takes place in 1963, and it's a diary. And I had the same issue because a young girl is recording in her diary what, I think a teacher, what someone had called her boyfriend, who was black, the girl's white, black, and he called her the N-word. And my first draft had the N-word in there, and my editor said, colored would be okay, the N-word is not okay. So I had to figure out how I could say that how I could write that in a way that a 16-year-old would have written that in her diary and still be true to what that would sound like. Okay, all right, let's go on to our next question. Let's talk about primary sources. So one of the problems that you have, in my opinion, today, is that if you're doing historical, there's a whole ton of disinformation out there, or misinformation, or slightly off information and stuff. So it's really, really important that you make sure that you get the essential information you need from the right sources. So you want to talk about what primary sources, if any, that you were able to use? Ones of us who are left up here, so.
I'll say it in terms of something I'm working on. I'm working on something that's still amorphous, but Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren, he was raised in my hometown of Bakersfield. His father was murdered, and that murder was never solved. And when Earl Warren at that time was the Alameda County DA, it was maybe 5 years before he became governor. And the police department offered to do things to help solve that case that Earl Warren told them not to do. They were gonna bug a cell in San Quentin in order to get information. He said not to. So my problem is that it's Bakersfield, where I grew up, and there are still people alive who were involved in this.
Yep.
So there's the going down and getting all the details, you know, about those records, who did what, who promised what did they really do, why was it never solved? And it's complicated to get the exact details, the documents, when also you're dealing with personalities of people who may be involved. So that's a little bit different. You mentioned historical can go back, can be within 25 years. This would have been 1938. So
Definitely historical.
it's personalities, and it's defensiveness, and it's the reputation of groups of people who were involved that sometimes block you from getting all the information. And yet I'm taking the lesson that I learned on this most recent book, that sometimes if I'm not able to get everything I need to do a great job in my author's note explaining what I was not able to get and what I did with that absence, what I invented in that absence.
Okay. You wanna?
You can use AI for some of this, but I do want to add a caveat to that, because you have to recall, if you're looking up information in this way, AI is programmed with the entirety of the internet. The entirety of the internet has a lot of great information, but it's not all correct. So you can tell it to cite the primary sources that it is pulling that information from, and I would recommend, if you do that, that you use that feature and go back to the original source material to fact check yourself before you run with that.
I think one of the things that have kind of destroyed our sense of reality is television and movies. I was the Army liaison in the TV and film business in Los Angeles for 5 years. And we had a big sign in my office that said 15 things you wouldn't know without the movies, and the first thing on it was medieval peasants had perfect teeth. If you've ever seen the Mel Gibson movie, I can't think of the name of it right now.
Braveheart.
Yeah, Braveheart. Everybody had perfect teeth. They didn't even have any teeth in the 1300s. But that and the Eiffel Tower can be seen from every hotel room in Paris. So no matter where you go in Paris, you open the door and you see the Eiffel Tower. But we have become so accustomed to that some writers tend to think, okay, well, I can write about medieval peasants, chewing a steak or something. Well, they had to grind it up or somehow figure out how to make it work, because what we have been used to seeing and sometimes reading is not reality. It's not true to your characters in your book or your story. So just be careful with that.
One of the things I would suggest is that there is plenty of scholarly research that's been done in most of the areas. So, before I wrote this book, I read everything I could get my hands on about the culprit. I read, if you're interested in Revolutionary War, if you haven't read this book, it's a wonderful book called Valiant Ambition. It's the intersecting lives of George Washington and Benedict Arnold. It's absolutely fascinating. I read Hamilton's Mistress, all of which just trying to get, and I've read several of Joseph's, what's his last name? Gosh, sorry. Joseph Ellis, right? Yes, Joseph Ellis has written several authoritative on George Washington based on letters, so all of those things. And if you love historical fiction, I have a book to recommend to you that you probably don't know about that is absolutely fantastic. If you love historical fiction and the American Revolution, you should read the book Burr by Gore Vidal. It's old. It was published in 1980, I think, and I've read it twice. And what you will get from Burr that you don't get from anyplace else is he tells the story of the founding of the country through the eyes of Aaron Burr. And it's a very interesting perspective, which kind of gives you a little broader perspective of what things were like at that point. Okay, we got a few more minutes left. How about, let's start with, I got another question, but I wanna make sure we answer your question. So, anybody have a question for our panel? Yes.
Have any of you ever reached out to historians? I mean, you talked about reading the book. Do you ever just reach out?
I've never reached out, not to a personal one, but to like librarians and people who have some, yes, but somebody else can.
When I was hitting that wall with this book and the missing grand jury report, I mean, I was on the phone with not just librarians, but the clerk of the court in San Francisco, a professional researcher of San Francisco history. I mean, I had maybe, the California historian, I don't even remember the title. Yes, I reached out, and one of the things that fascinated me was they all wanted to help. I never got anybody who rejected my request for help. Sometimes they passed me along to somebody else, but it was so gratifying considering how insecure I was about bothering anyone. I didn't want to bother anybody when they already had a job to do. But no, this was fun work to them, and they got so into it, it made me feel like, oh, so I guess this is interesting. If the librarians and the clerk of the court and all of these people are like all roused up about it. So I highly recommend it. And now I'm getting at my nerve to go meet some police officers.
Okay, yes.
When did you guys, excuse me, when did you decide to put the mystery into this historical piece of work? And what fascinated you about not only the history, but the mystery?
Well, for me, the mystery and the history were locked together because it takes, for the Atlanta series, it takes place in the 1950s, therefore it's according to everything now, it's historical. The mystery was who killed the guy that was on pool table number 7, and it's evolved into now a series, and each one is another mystery that happens in the Atlanta in the 1953. So it just kind of like the first domino fell over, and the rest of them just kept falling behind it.
So did you think of it first as a history that you just had? I don't mean just that you chose to set in this area, or did you choose to pick this area and then decide to write a history?
Yeah, did
That's
the
what you're
mystery
asking.
come first or the history?
Yeah.
Yes.
But you said that they came together. Yeah.
The setting is a pool room, and the book is called The Wrath of the Dixie Mafia. My dad was on the fringes of the Dixie Mafia in 1953, and I used to go on Saturdays. I would go with him and hang out in this pool room. This pool room is actually a real pool room in Atlanta. It's called Big Town, and it actually existed. So I knew all of those characters, and it was a fascinating time for me, so I wanted to write something about it, but then I had to find out what I could put in the pool room to make it work, to make a story out of it. So that's when I put the body on table number 7, and the rest is 25-year-old history.
That's a really interesting question to me because, well, I already told you I was totally found this history sticky for personal reasons to me. But then I'd always loved mysteries, thrillers, everything like that. It's just a natural love of mine. Loved historicals and loved mysteries. But this thing is like 34 years of teaching. One of my favorite moments is what I think of as revelations. I love to teach for the revelations. I love the point where in a classroom you can say, so if you try this, and then everybody's like, thank heavens, now I've got a solution. I love the look on their face when they get a revelation. But also that was the best thing about reading student essays, is like I'd read it and then be shocked or surprised at something they revealed that I hadn't thought of before. So it was like this deeply gratifying thing. And nothing provides that for me in reading better than mysteries, because that's the whole structure of it. It's like the constant slow series of revelations that builds to something else. So that's one part. And the second part is I was a brand new writer in fiction, and I felt like nothing like mystery would teach me about the architecture of a story. And it really, I learned a lot by by holding myself accountable to the shape of the mystery in my books.
I chose my time period very specifically for two reasons. One, if you're writing a classic mystery, it's a lot easier to do if you don't have to worry about cell phones, DNA, things like that in the modern period. It takes all of that off the table. Two, I'm a huge Agatha Christie fan, and I really love the stuff that she did in the 1930s, and I thought it would be fun to dabble with that same time period.
And my answer is completely different. I don't want to miss, my novel is not a mystery. I think I'm pretty sure, they'll know better how to market it. It'll probably be marketed as historical suspense. Because in my case, everybody knows bits and pieces about my story. Like, for example, we don't know who this woman was, but we know that she was instrumental in helping uncover the plot that Benedict Arnold was hatching to turn West Point over to the British. Okay, so we know from some letters that people know that. So there isn't a mystery involved. In my case, the story is more of how this English woman, came from England, settled in America just before the Revolution, becomes, instead of being a devoted Briton, becomes not just a patriot, but a patriot spy. So it's the suspense of going through that and what she went through to do that and how she almost gets caught and stuff like that. So it's not, these are all mysteries. So in that case, I chose for a different reason, but essentially the same thing. So but this book takes place in 1998. There are very few cell phones. You don't have any of that. So that's part of that. And I built a mystery around that particular time. But in the new book that's coming out, that's not the case. We got a few more minutes. I got the signal. Anybody have any other questions?
I'm just curious, there's so many genre mixes now.
Yeah.
And I know you're all writing in the mystery line, and well, you just kind of answered my question. Yours is not a mystery, one of yours is not a mystery, but it's based on historical time period. And that's kind of where mine is. It's a story about a woman in Chicago who started in the theater as a little kid in Yiddish theater and became one of the most famous actresses in Chicago, kind of like Chicago's Oprah or Ann Landers, or I don't know if you used to read Ann Landers.
Sure.
Everybody's that old, but she was from Chicago, and it spans this time from the 1920s to the 1950s when a couple little girls spot her walking down the street in the hat and the gloves and the purse, and they're like, what in the world is this? And it just opens up that revelation. It's sort of a mystery. Who is this woman? But
it's not a traditional mystery. It's not a whodunit.
No.
Right.
But it could
It's
be
who is she?
Who is she?
Yeah,
Yes,
right,
you
right,
can be
yeah.
answering a question, and your
Different
novel
kind of mystery.
is the revelation about that. And it's not just who done it, it'd be how done it, or why done
Right.
it.
And why done it?
Yeah.
And it's a miraculous lifestyle that she lived because of the eras and being a woman in the theater and a little girl in the theater. It was tough. Very
I
tough
need to
time.
make a
I
correction.
have
We are
one
not old,
general
we
comment.
are historical.
Oh, okay.
Season.
Season.
My daughter over in the corner, Colleen, is filming this, and it will be on a podcast. So if you'll get one of her cards, you'll be able to see it as soon as we get home and she edits it. So you'll be able to see anything that you missed. Yes.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you for caring.
All right, I think we're right at the end. Thank you so much for sticking around. Thanks the panel for their contribution. If you want the name of that book, take my